I thought I was walking into just another monthly family dinner at my parents' house in suburban Cleveland. The familiar smell of my mother's pot roast filled the air, and I could hear the usual chatter from the dining room, where my extended family had gathered. But as I stepped through that doorway, my father's voice cut through the conversations like a knife. "Your brother Jake is successful and responsible unlike you," he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "He doesn't need help from anyone." The words hit me like a physical blow, especially knowing that for the past 2 years, I had been secretly sending Jake $5,000 every single month. Growing up in the Patterson household meant living in Jake's shadow from day one. While I spent countless hours studying for my nursing degree and working part-time jobs to pay my way through college, Jake coasted through high school on mediocre athletic achievements that our parents celebrated like Olympic victories. Every report card I brought home with straight A's earned a casual, "That's nice, honey," while Jake's C average with 1 B in gym class warranted a family celebration dinner. Even now, at 28 years old, I worked as an emergency room nurse at Cleveland General Hospital, pulling 12-hour shifts that left me exhausted but fulfilled. I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment across town, driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic that I had paid off through careful budgeting and sacrifice. Meanwhile, Jake had somehow transformed from the college dropout who couldn't hold a job into the golden child who owned a thriving landscaping business with a crew of 8 employees and a fleet of brand-new trucks. The transformation had started exactly 2 years ago when Jake called me at 3 a.m, sobbing into the phone about an eviction notice and threats from creditors. His wife Amy was pregnant with their second child, and they were about to lose their house. I had never heard my big brother cry before, and something inside me broke listening to his desperation. "Carla, I know I haven't been the best brother, but I'm drowning here." He had whispered, his voice thick with shame. "I just need enough to get caught up on rent and utilities, maybe $3,000 to get back on my feet. I'll pay you back as soon as I figure things out, I promise." That first transfer had cost me my vacation fund, the money I had been saving for a trip to Europe that I had been planning for 2 years. But family came first, right? When Jake called again 6 weeks later, explaining that he had a chance to start his own landscaping business but needed equipment money, I worked extra shifts at the hospital and sent him $5,000 from my emergency fund. The monthly payments became routine after that. Jake would call with updates about his growing business, how he had landed another commercial contract, how he was building something amazing. Our parents glowed with pride every time they talked about his success, constantly comparing his entrepreneurial spirit to my safe career choice in nursing. "Why can't you be more ambitious like your brother?" my father had asked just last month. "Jake is building something real, creating jobs, taking risks. You're just following orders in scrubs." Tonight's dinner was supposed to celebrate Jake's latest achievement, landing a contract with the city to maintain all the public parks. The extended family had gathered to hear about his success, and I had arrived expecting to smile and nod, while everyone praised my brother's business acumen. Instead, I found myself standing in the doorway listening to my father explain to my aunts and uncles how Jake had built his company from nothing, how he was completely self-sufficient, how he represented everything a responsible adult should be. Unlike Carla, who seems content to drift through life without any real ambition, he continued gesturing toward me without even making eye contact. Jake doesn't need anyone's help. He's proven he can succeed on his own merit. The room fell silent as 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. My cousin Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. My Aunt Margaret cleared her throat and suddenly found her dinner plate fascinating. Jake sat at the head of the table, his face flushed, but his mouth curved in a slight smirk that he tried to hide behind his wine glass. Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. 2 years of working double shifts, of canceling plans, of eating ramen noodles so I could send my brother money to build his self-made empire. 2 years of listening to my family dismiss my career, my choices, my life, while praising the success that I had literally funded. "Perfect," I said quietly, pulling out my phone and opening my banking app. Since Jake doesn't need help from anyone, my $5,000 monthly transfers end today. The wine glass slipped from Jake's fingers and shattered against his plate. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's fork clattered against her plate as she stared at me with wide eyes. "What did you just say?" "I said the $5,000 I transfer to Jake every month stops today." I repeated, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Since he's so successful and independent." "That's not true," my father stammered, looking between Jake and me. "Jake built his business himself. Tell her son." But Jake had gone completely pale, his hands trembling as he reached for his napkin to clean up the spilled wine. "Carla, you don't understand the situation." He started, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand perfectly," I said, turning my phone screen toward the table. "Would you like to see 2 years of bank transfers, $5,000 on the 15th of every month without fail? Equipment payments, truck payments, insurance payments, payroll when you couldn't make ends meet." My mother stood up so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. "You're lying. Why would you lie about something like this?" I scrolled through the banking app showing transfer after transfer. March 15th, 5,000. February 15th, 5,000. January 15th, 5,000. Should I keep going back? Uncle Robert leaned forward in his chair, squinting at my phone screen. "Those transactions are real, Margaret," he said quietly to my mother. "Bank apps don't lie." Jake finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and defensive. "It wasn't charity, okay? These were loans. Temporary help to get the business off the ground. Every successful entrepreneur needs startup capital." "Startup capital that you never mentioned to anyone," I shot back. "Startup capital that turned into permanent monthly payments with no discussion of repayment terms, no contracts, no acknowledgement." My father's face had cycled through confusion, anger, and now something approaching horror. "Jake, is this true? Has your sister been funding your business?" "It's complicated, Dad. When I started the company, I needed some initial investment to cover overhead costs until the contracts started paying off. Carla offered to help, and I've been grateful for her support while building something that will eventually benefit the whole family." I offered. The laugh that escaped my throat was bitter and sharp. "You called me crying at 3 a.m, begging for money to avoid eviction. You've never once mentioned paying me back or discussed any kind of repayment plan. You've been taking credit for success that I funded while our parents criticized me for not being more like you." The room erupted into uncomfortable murmurs as family members began whispering among themselves. Jake's wife, Amy, who had been silent throughout the dinner, suddenly spoke up. "I knew something was wrong with our finances," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Jake, you told me the business was profitable. You said we could afford the new house, the kids' private school, the vacation to Disney World. But our personal accounts never match what you claim the business is earning." "Amy, don't," Jake pleaded, reaching across the table toward her. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion." When is the time, Jake? When is the right moment to discuss the fact that my husband has been lying to me about our financial situation for 2 years? I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness watching my brother's carefully constructed image crumble in real time. Part of me wanted to leave, to walk away from this mess and never look back. But another part of me needed to see this through, needed the family to understand the full scope of what had been happening. "The worst part," I said, addressing the room but looking directly at my father, "is that I've been working 60-hour weeks at the hospital to support Jake's business while listening to lectures about my lack of ambition. I've been sacrificing my own financial security, my own dreams, my own future to prop up the son you're so proud of." My father opened and closed his mouth several times, clearly struggling to process this information. "But why didn't you tell us? Why keep it secret?" "Because Jake asked me to," I said simply. "He said it would be temporary, that he wanted to prove he could succeed before telling the family about any help he had received. I respected that. I believed in him. I thought I was helping my brother build something real." Jake pushed back from the table and stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Yes, Carla has been helpful during the startup phase of my business, but I've been working 16-hour days building client relationships, managing employees, growing the company. The money was just initial capital. The success is mine. Initial capital that's been flowing monthly for 2 years, Amy said coldly. Initial capital that you never told your wife about. Initial capital that apparently stops today, which explains why you've been so stressed lately. The color drained from Jake's face again as he realized Amy was connecting dots he hadn't wanted her to see. We'll figure something out. The business is solid. We have contracts lined up through next spring. What happens when those contracts don't cover the overhead you've been supplementing with Carla's money? Amy asked, her voice rising. What happens when reality hits our budget? Jake looked around the room desperately as if searching for an ally or an escape route. Finally, his gaze landed on me, and I saw something I had never seen in my brother's eyes before: genuine fear. Carla, you can't just cut off the funding without notice. There are commitments I've made based on projected cash flow. Equipment payments, employee contracts, insurance premiums. The business needs consistency to survive. Then maybe you should have built a business model that didn't depend on your sister's charity, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. Maybe you should have been honest with your wife, your parents, and yourself about what was really happening. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from Jake, progressing from pleading to angry to desperate over the course of the night. A few were from Amy asking if we could talk. One was from my mother, simply saying, "We need to discuss this as a family." But the one that made my stomach drop was from an unknown number. "This is Marcus from Summit Landscaping Partners. We need to speak with you immediately regarding your brother's business obligations. Please call back today." The emergency family meeting was called for Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. I had spent the weekend avoiding phone calls and trying to process the emotional whiplash of finally telling the truth after 2 years of secret sacrifice. Saturday morning brought a surprise visit from Jake, who appeared at my apartment door looking like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "What I've done is stop enabling a lie," I replied, closing the door but remaining standing. "What I've done is refuse to continue funding a deception that was hurting my entire family." Jake collapsed onto my couch, burying his face in his hands. "Carla, you don't understand the situation I'm in. When I started the business, I made certain commitments based on projected revenue streams. The company has been growing, the contracts are real, but the cash flow timing doesn't always match up with the expenses. So you used my money to bridge the gaps while telling everyone you were self-sufficient. I used your investment to build something bigger than either of us could create alone," he corrected, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "This isn't just about me anymore. I have 8 employees depending on these jobs. Amy and the kids are finally living the life they deserve. Mom and Dad are proud of what I've accomplished." "What you've accomplished with my money," I said flatly. "Money I earned working extra shifts at the hospital. Money I could have used for my own dreams, my own future, my own life." Jake looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I always planned to pay you back. Once the business stabilized, once we built up enough capital reserves, I was going to make it right. I just needed more time." "How much more time, Jake? How much more money? Because I've already given you $240,000 over the past 2 years. That's $250,000 that I'll never get back." His face went white. "It hasn't been that much." I pulled out my phone and showed him the calculation I had done the night before. $5,000 a month for 24 months equals $120,000. But that doesn't include the extra payments for emergencies equipment, repairs, the down payment on your house, Amy's medical bills when Dylan was born. When I added everything up, it came to $237,412. Jake stared at the screen for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his expression. The desperation was still there, but now it was mixed with something that looked like genuine shock. "I never realized it added up to so much," he said quietly. I was just thinking month to month, crisis to crisis. I never stepped back to see the big picture. Well, now you know, I said, sitting down across from him. Now you understand what I've sacrificed for your success story. Carla, I'm in serious trouble here. His voice broke slightly as he continued. The business partners I mentioned, Marcus and Troy, they're not just contractors. They're investors who put up $50,000 for equipment and vehicles based on my assurance that I had family financial backing. They expect repayment by the end of this month, and I don't have it. My stomach dropped. What kind of investors? The kind who don't like being told that the family backing just disappeared. Jake said, his hands shaking now. They made it clear when I called them yesterday that they expect their money returned with interest regardless of what happens with family dynamics. So get a business loan, refinance something, figure it out like an actual entrepreneur would. I can't get a traditional loan because I've already leveraged everything the business owns as collateral for other debts. The trucks, the equipment, even some of the contracts are tied up in various financing agreements. And now, without your monthly payments, I can't cover the basic operating expenses, let alone make payments to Marcus and Troy. I felt a chill run down my spine. Jake, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that if I can't come up with $50,000 by next Friday, I lose everything. The business shuts down, 8 families lose their income, Amy and the kids lose their home, and I face potential legal action from investors who thought they were dealing with someone who had reliable financial backing. The manipulation was so obvious that it made me angry all over again. So this is my fault. Your poor planning, your deception, your irresponsible business practices are somehow my responsibility. I'm not saying it's your fault, Jake said quickly. I'm saying that we're family, and when family members are drowning, we help each other. I helped you move into your apartment 2 years ago. I fixed your car when it broke down last winter. This is what families do. You helped me move furniture for 4 hours, I said incredulously. I paid for my car repairs myself. You're comparing afternoon favors to $250,000 in financial support. Jake was quiet for a moment, then looked up at me with what I'm sure he thought were puppy dog eyes. I know I messed up Carla. I know I should have been more transparent about the arrangement. But if you could loan me the money to pay off Marcus and Troy, I promise I'll restructure everything. I'll make you a partner in the business. You'll get a percentage of all future profits. After 2 years of empty promises, you want me to give you another $50,000 based on more promises. I want you to invest in your family's future, he said, his voice taking on a slightly harder edge. Because if this business fails, it won't just hurt me. It'll destroy Amy and the kids. It'll devastate Mom and Dad. And everyone will know that it happened because you chose money over family loyalty. I stared at my brother for a long moment, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. This wasn't desperation or poor planning. This was manipulation wrapped in emotional blackmail delivered with the practiced skill of someone who had been using family guilt to get what he wanted for years. Get out of my apartment, Jake, I said quietly. Carla, please. Get out now before I say something that can't be taken back. He stood up slowly, his face cycling through anger, disbelief, and finally something that looked like genuine hurt. You're really going to let everything fall apart because you're too selfish to help your own brother. I'm going to stop being an enabler, I replied, opening the door for him. I'm going to stop funding your lies and let you face the consequences of your choices. Jake paused in the doorway, his jaw tight with anger. You'll be sorry when I lose everything, and it's your fault. Amy will never forgive you. The kids will grow up knowing their aunt chose money over their family's security. You think about that, Carla. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment and cried for the first time since the dinner revelation. Not because I regretted my decision, but because I was finally grieving the relationship with my brother that I now realized had never really existed in the first place. Sunday's family meeting was even worse than I had anticipated. Both my parents were waiting in the living room when I arrived, their faces grim and disappointed. Jake was already there with Amy, who looked like she had been crying. My Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert were also present, apparently serving as family mediators. Carla, we need to understand what's really going on here. My father began without preamble. Jake has explained his side of the situation, and frankly, we're very concerned about your attitude toward family responsibility. My attitude toward family responsibility. I sat down across from them, feeling like I was on trial. I've been taking responsibility for Jake's failures for 2 years. I've sacrificed my own financial security to prop up his business, while you all criticized me for not being more successful. My mother leaned forward, her voice sharp with disappointment. Jake has been trying to build something meaningful, and instead of supporting him, you're tearing him down out of jealousy. This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior we've been worried about. Selfish behavior, I repeated slowly. Mom, I've given Jake nearly $250,000. How is that selfish? Because now, when he needs your help the most, you're abandoning him. She shot back. Because you're more concerned with being right than with protecting your family. Amy spoke up for the first time since I had arrived. Carla, I know Jake should have been more honest about the financial arrangement, but cutting off support without warning has put us in an impossible position. We have 2 children and a mortgage based on business projections that included your contributions. Projections that Jake created without telling you where the money was actually coming from, I pointed out. Amy, did you know that Jake has been receiving $5,000 a month from me for the past 2 years? Amy's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I knew there was some family support in the early stages, she said carefully. But Jake told me it was a one-time gift from his parents to help with startup costs. The room fell silent as everyone processed this revelation. Even my parents looked shocked. Jake told you what? My mother asked, her voice rising. He said you and Dad had given him $20,000 to help launch the business. Amy continued, looking confused. He said it was money you had been saving for a family vacation that you decided to invest in his future instead. My father's face turned red. We never gave Jake any money for his business. We don't have $20,000 sitting around to give anyone. Jake, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. There was some confusion about the source of the initial funding. I may have simplified the explanation to avoid family complications. You may have simplified, Amy said, her voice growing cold. Jake, you told me your parents had invested in the business. You used that story to convince me that the family believed in your plan. Was any of that true? The family support was real, Jake said defensively. It just came from Carla instead of Mom and Dad. The important thing was that I was building something sustainable for our future. Sustainable with my monthly payments, I interjected. Sustainable based on lies and deception. Sustainable only as long as I kept working extra shifts to fund your dream. The conversation devolved into shouting after that, with family members taking sides and accusations flying in every direction. My father blamed me for not discussing the arrangement with the family before cutting off funding. My mother accused me of trying to control Jake's life through financial manipulation. Amy demanded answers about their household budget that Jake couldn't provide. In the middle of this chaos, the doorbell rang. My mother went to answer it, returning moments later with 2 men I didn't recognize. We're looking for Jake Patterson, one of them said, scanning the room. I'm Marcus Webb, and this is Troy Chen. We need to discuss some business matters. Jake's face went completely white. Marcus, Troy, this isn't a good time for a business meeting. Actually, it's the perfect time, Marcus replied, his voice carrying an edge that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Because we've been trying to reach you since Friday and you haven't been returning our calls. Troy stepped forward, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Mr. Patterson, you have 7 days to provide the $50,000 you owe our investment group, plus the additional $30,000 in interest and fees that have accrued due to late payments. Additional $30,000, Amy gasped. Jake, you said they were owed $50,000 total. There have been some misunderstandings about the payment schedule, Jake said weakly. I was going to explain everything once I had a chance to restructure the financing. Marcus looked around the room, taking in the family meeting atmosphere. Are these the family financial backers you mentioned, Mr. Patterson? Because our agreement was based on your assurance that you had reliable family support for the business operations. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as the full scope of Jake's deception became clear to everyone in the room. He hadn't just lied to me about repayment. He hadn't just lied to Amy about the source of funding. He had used my financial support as collateral for additional loans, while telling investors that he had broader family backing. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private. My father suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. Actually, this concerns all of you, Troy said, consulting his folder, because Mr. Patterson used family financial references to secure these loans. If he defaults, we'll be pursuing recovery through all available family assets. Amy stood up so quickly that her chair fell over. Jake, what have you done? What have you gotten our family into? But before Jake could answer, my mother made an announcement that shocked everyone in the room. I've been giving Jake money too, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. $15,000 from my retirement fund over the past 6 months. I thought I was helping him through a rough patch. The room exploded into chaos, but all I could think was that this nightmare was far from over. After Marcus and Troy left with promises to return with legal documentation, the family meeting continued in Amy's absence. She had stormed out after demanding that Jake come clean about every debt, every lie, every financial obligation he had hidden from her. The children were with Amy's mother for the evening, but I could see the fear in her eyes as she realized their entire life might be built on lies. I found Amy sitting in her car in the driveway crying into her cell phone as she spoke to what sounded like a lawyer. When she saw me approaching, she rolled down the window. I'm sorry you got dragged into this mess, she said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. I had no idea Jake was taking money from you every month. If I had known, I would have put a stop to it immediately. It's not your fault, Amy. Jake made sure none of us knew the full picture. Amy laughed bitterly. The full picture keeps getting bigger. I just got off the phone with my divorce attorney, and she's telling me I need to document every financial irregularity before Jake tries to hide assets or create new debts in my name. I felt my heart sink. You're filing for divorce. Carla, I found something yesterday that I haven't told anyone about yet. Amy's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I found betting apps on Jake's phone, not just 1 or 2 casual bets, dozens of accounts with different betting sites, hundreds of transactions over the past year. My stomach dropped. How much? I can't get into all the accounts, but from what I can see in our bank statements, he's withdrawn at least $30,000 in cash over the past 6 months. ATM withdrawals, cash, advances on credit cards, money transfers to payment apps. All of it happening on days when he said he was working late or meeting with clients. The pieces were starting to fall into place in the worst possible way. Amy, have you talked to anyone about this? A counselor, a financial advisor, anyone? I called my dad this morning, she said, fresh tears starting to flow. He's driving down from Toledo tonight with my brother. They're going to help me figure out what assets we actually have versus what Jake claims we have. I'm terrified of what we're going to find. I reached through the car window and squeezed her hand. Whatever you find, you and the kids are going to be okay. I'll help however I can. I keep thinking about the house, Amy continued. Jake insisted we could afford the mortgage payments, but I've been wondering why we never seem to have money for anything else. Now I'm realizing that your monthly transfers were probably covering our basic living expenses while Jake gambled away his actual business profits. The next morning brought devastating confirmation of Amy's fears. I received a call from my bank's fraud department asking about a loan application that had been submitted using my name and social security number. According to the representative, someone had applied for a $35,000 personal loan using my employment information and banking history as collateral. Ma'am, did you authorize anyone else to apply for credit using your personal information? The investigator asked. Absolutely not. I replied, though my heart was already racing as I realized what must have happened. I need to know who submitted this application and when. The application was submitted electronically 3 days ago, and it included very detailed financial information about your employment at Cleveland General Hospital. Do you have any idea who might have access to this information? I closed my eyes, feeling sick. I think I know exactly who submitted that application. After filing a police report for identity theft, I called Amy to warn her about what I had discovered. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear children's voices in the background. "Amy, it's Carla. Are you somewhere safe to talk?" "I'm at my mom's house with Emma and Dylan. We left this morning after I found out that Jake took a second mortgage on our house without telling me. What's going on?" "Jake used my personal information to apply for a loan. I just filed a police report for identity theft. Amy, you need to check your credit immediately. If he's desperate enough to steal my identity, he might have done the same thing to you." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Amy spoke, her voice hollow and defeated. "He already did. I found out this morning that there are 3 credit cards in my name that I never applied for. The total debt is over $40,000, and they're all maxed out. My credit score has dropped 200 points in the past year, and I had no idea." "Amy, I'm so sorry. This is so much worse than I realized." "Carla, there's something else. I think Jake's business partners aren't just investors. My brother did some research on Summit Landscaping Partners after last night's meeting. Marcus Webb has been arrested twice for money laundering, and the company address is a mail forwarding service. I think Jake got involved with some very dangerous people." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "We need to call the police. If Jake is mixed up with money launderers, then my monthly transfers might have been used to facilitate illegal activities." "I already called. There's going to be a detective here this afternoon to take my statement." "Carla, I'm scared. What if Jake's gambling debts aren't just with legitimate bookmakers? What if he owes money to people who don't care about legal collection methods?" That afternoon, I met with Detective Sarah Martinez at the police station to provide documentation about the identity theft and the money transfers to Jake's business. Detective Martinez was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor who made it clear that financial fraud cases like this often revealed much larger criminal enterprises. "Ms. Patterson, I need you to understand that if your brother's business was being used to launder money, then your transfers might have inadvertently made you part of a federal investigation," she explained as she reviewed my banking records. "We're going to need complete cooperation from you and your family to sort out what was legitimate business activity versus what was criminal." "Detective, I had no idea that Jake was involved in anything illegal. I thought I was helping my brother start a landscaping company." "I believe you and your financial records support that, but we've been tracking Summit Landscaping Partners for 6 months as part of a larger investigation into organized gambling operations. Your brother's company appears to have been processing payments for illegal betting operations while maintaining a legitimate landscaping front." My head was spinning as I tried to process this information. "Are you saying that Jake knew he was helping criminals?" "That's what we need to determine. Based on the financial records we've subpoenaed, it appears that your brother's company was receiving large cash payments for landscaping services that were never actually performed. The money would come in as payment for landscaping contracts, get mixed with legitimate business funds, including your transfers, and then get paid out to various shell companies." "But Jake's business does real landscaping work. I've seen the trucks, the equipment, the crews working on job sites." "Absolutely. That's what made it such an effective laundering operation. The legitimate business provided cover for the illegal financial transactions. Your brother may have started out with good intentions, but somewhere along the way, he either became a willing participant or got in over his head with people who don't take no for an answer." I left the police station feeling like my entire world had shifted on its axis. Not only had I been unknowingly funding my brother's lies for 2 years, but I might have been inadvertently participating in a money laundering scheme. The thought that my hard-earned nursing salary had been used to facilitate criminal activity made me physically ill. That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a man's voice that I didn't recognize spoke in a calm, measured tone that somehow managed to be more threatening than if he had been shouting. "Ms. Patterson, my name is Vincent Reeves. I understand that you've been providing financial support to your brother's business operations. Who is this? How did you get this number?" "I represent certain parties who have a financial interest in your brother's business activities. We need to schedule a meeting to discuss how his recent cash flow problems are going to be resolved." I felt ice-cold fear wash over me. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any involvement in my brother's business." "Ms. Patterson, our records show that you've transferred over $200,000 to Summit Landscaping over the past 2 years. That level of investment makes you a stakeholder in our eyes, whether you realized it or not. We'll be in touch soon to arrange a meeting." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in horror. I immediately called Detective Martinez, who told me to pack a bag and stay with a friend until they could determine the scope of the threat. As I threw clothes into an overnight bag, my phone rang again. This time it was Amy calling from her mother's house. "Carla, Jake just called me. He's been arrested. Federal agents picked him up at the business this morning, and they've seized all the equipment, trucks, and financial records. They're saying he's being charged with money laundering and fraud." I sank onto my bed, overwhelmed by the scope of the disaster that my simple desire to help my brother had helped create. "Amy, are you and the kids safe?" "We're staying here for now, but my attorney says that as Jake's wife, I might face civil asset forfeiture proceedings. They could try to take our house, our cars, anything that was purchased with money that came from illegal activities." "I'm so sorry, Amy. I never imagined that trying to help Jake would lead to this." "Carla, this isn't your fault. You were trying to be a good sister. Jake made the choices that created this mess, but I need you to know that whatever happens with the legal proceedings, I don't blame you for cutting off the money when you did. If anything, you probably prevented this from getting even worse." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to process the magnitude of what had happened. In the span of 1 week, my brother's carefully constructed success story had collapsed, revealing layers of deception, criminal activity, and financial fraud that had destroyed multiple lives. But somehow, despite the fear and uncertainty and the knowledge that federal investigators would be scrutinizing every aspect of my financial life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years: relief. For the first time since Jake's midnight phone call asking for help, I was no longer responsible for propping up his lies. The FBI interview took place in a sterile conference room at the federal building downtown. Agent Rachel Chen and Agent Michael Torres sat across from me with stacks of financial documents, bank records, and what appeared to be surveillance photos of Jake's business operations. My attorney, Linda Walsh, had prepared me for this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for seeing my own bank statements spread across a federal investigator's table. "Ms. Patterson, we want to be clear that you are not a target of this investigation." Agent Chen began, her tone professional but not unkind. "However, your financial transfers to Summit Landscaping represent the largest single source of legitimate funds flowing through what we now know was a money laundering operation. I had no idea that Jake's business was involved in anything illegal." I said for what felt like the 100th time since this nightmare began. "I thought I was helping my brother build a legitimate landscaping company." Agent Torres pulled out a series of photographs. "These are surveillance images we took over the past 3 months. Do you recognize any of these individuals?" The photos showed Jake's business yard with the trucks and equipment I had helped purchase, but there were also images of men I didn't recognize loading and unloading unmarked boxes, meetings taking place in the parking lot after hours, and cash transactions that clearly had nothing to do with landscaping services. "I don't recognize anyone except my brother," I said honestly. "But Agent Chen, what does this mean for the money I transferred? Am I going to be charged with anything?" "Your cooperation and complete transparency have been noted," Agent Chen replied. our investigation shows that your transfers were legitimate financial support from a family member, not payments for illegal services. However, we need your testimony to help us understand how the operation worked and what your brother may or may not have known about the illegal activities." Linda leaned forward in her chair. "What kind of testimony are we talking about? Are you asking my client to testify against her brother?" "We're asking her to testify truthfully about the financial arrangement and what she observed about the business operations," Agent Torres said. "Ms. Patterson, did your brother ever mention receiving large cash payments for work that seemed unusual or disproportionate to the services provided?" I thought back over 2 years of conversations with Jake about his business. "Actually, yes. About 6 months ago, he called me excited about landing a huge contract with some property management company. He said they were paying him $50,000 upfront for maintenance work on a dozen commercial properties. But when I asked him about it later, he got vague about the details and changed the subject." The agents exchanged glances. "Did he mention the name of the property management company?" "I think it was something like North Shore Property Management, but I'm not completely sure." "Why?" "North Shore Property Management is a shell company that we've been tracking. They were using fake landscaping contracts to justify large cash transfers to criminal organizations. Your brother's company was processing these payments and taking a percentage before forwarding the money to its final destination." The room felt like it was spinning. So Jake knew he was helping criminals. "That's what we're trying to determine," Agent Chen said. "Based on our investigation, it appears that your brother may have started out as an unwitting participant, but at some point he became aware of what was happening and chose to continue because the money was too good to pass up." After the interview, Linda and I sat in her office discussing the implications. "Carla, the good news is that you're clearly not going to face any criminal charges. The bad news is that you're going to be a key witness in a federal case that could send your brother to prison for 10 to 15 years. What about the money I transferred? Will I ever get any of it back?" Linda shook her head. "Any assets purchased with funds that flowed through the criminal enterprise are subject to civil asset forfeiture. That includes the business equipment, the trucks, and unfortunately, probably most of the money you sent to Jake. The government's position is that those funds became part of the criminal operation, even if you didn't know it." 2 weeks later, I received a subpoena to testify before a federal grand jury. The case had expanded beyond just Jake's involvement to include a network of businesses that had been used to launder money for illegal gambling operations run by organized crime. According to the indictment, the scheme had processed over $12 million in illegal funds over the past 3 years. The grand jury testimony was easier than I had expected. The prosecutors were thorough, but fair, and they seemed genuinely interested in understanding how an innocent family member could get caught up in something like this without realizing what was happening. I told them about Jake's midnight phone calls, about the gradual escalation of his financial requests, about the lies he told to various family members about the source of his funding. After the testimony, I was approached by Assistant U.S. Attorney David Kim, who would be prosecuting the case. "Ms. Patterson, I want you to know that your brother's attorney has approached us about a possible plea agreement. He's willing to cooperate fully with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Part of that cooperation would involve testifying against the criminal organization that was using his business to launder money." "What does that mean for Jake?" "Now, if he provides substantial assistance in dismantling the larger criminal operation, he could be looking at 18 months to 3 years in federal prison instead of 10 to 15 years. But he would have to admit to knowing that he was facilitating illegal activities, which means acknowledging that he consciously chose to continue the relationship even after he understood what was happening." That evening, I received a call from Jake. He was calling from the federal detention center where he was being held pending trial, and his voice sounded smaller and more defeated than I had ever heard it. "Carla, I need to apologize to you," he began without preamble. "Not just for the money, not just for the lies, but for dragging you into something that could have destroyed your life." "Jake, what really happened? When did you know that the business was being used for illegal activities?" There was a long pause before he answered. "About 8 months ago, Marcus Webb approached me with an offer to process payments for some high-dollar landscaping contracts. The money was incredible, 3 times what I would normally charge for the work described. At first, I thought I was just getting lucky with wealthy clients who were willing to pay premium rates. But then you realized something was wrong." "I realized when I noticed that some of the properties I was supposed to be maintaining didn't actually exist. When I asked Marcus about it, he told me not to worry about the details, just to process the payments and take my cut. He made it clear that asking too many questions wouldn't be good for my health." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So you knew you were helping criminals and you kept doing it anyway?" "Carla, by that point, I was in so deep that I didn't see a way out. I owed you money. I owed Amy a lifestyle I couldn't afford. I had employees depending on me for their paychecks. The illegal money was the only thing keeping everything afloat. So, instead of coming clean and asking for help, you just kept digging deeper." I kept telling myself it was temporary, that I'd figure out a way to transition back to legitimate business once I got caught up on all my debts. But the gambling made everything worse. The more pressure I felt, the more I convinced myself that one big win would solve all my problems. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the brother I thought I knew versus the man who had just confessed to knowingly facilitating criminal activities while accepting money from his sister to maintain the facade. The trial took place 6 months later. Jake's cooperation with the federal investigation had indeed led to the arrest and conviction of a major organized crime figure, but it had also required him to admit publicly to his role in the money laundering scheme. I testified about the financial support I had provided, the lies Jake had told to the family, and the impact his deception had on our relationships. Amy testified about the financial fraud, the gambling addiction, and the fear she had experienced when she realized their entire life was built on criminal activities. She had filed for divorce and been granted full custody of the children, along with the right to keep their house, since it could be proven that the down payment had come from her legitimate savings rather than Jake's criminal proceeds. My parents testified about the emotional impact of discovering that their son had been lying to the entire family while using one daughter to fund criminal activities. My mother's health had deteriorated significantly due to the stress, and she had required counseling to deal with the guilt she felt about depleting her retirement fund to support Jake's lies. In the end, Jake was sentenced to 22 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He would also be required to pay restitution to the victims of the criminal organization he had helped, though the amount would likely exceed his ability to pay for many years. But perhaps more importantly for our family, the truth was finally out. There were no more secrets, no more lies, no more financial manipulation disguised as family loyalty. As I watched Jake being led away in handcuffs, I felt a complex mixture of sadness for the brother I had lost and relief that the nightmare was finally over. 6 months after Jake's sentencing, I received my first letter from him at the Federal Correctional Facility in Morgantown, West Virginia. I had not responded to his previous attempts at contact, needing time and space to process everything that had happened. But this letter was different. Instead of excuses and self-pity, it contained something I had never seen from my brother before: genuine accountability. "Carla," he wrote, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not writing this letter to ask for anything. I'm writing to take responsibility for the damage I caused to your life, to Amy's life, to our parents' lives, and to our entire family. I spent so many years blaming everyone else for my problems that I lost sight of the fact that my choices created the mess we're all dealing with." The letter went on to describe the counseling Jake was receiving in prison, his participation in a program for gambling addicts, and his growing understanding of how his behavior had affected the people who loved him. For the first time in our relationship, he acknowledged the magnitude of my sacrifice and the selfishness of his response to it. "I calculated that you gave me $237,412 over 2 years," he continued. But what I really took from you was your trust, your financial security, your peace of mind, and 2 years of your life that you spent working extra shifts to support my lies. I understand now that saying I'm sorry isn't enough, but it's where I have to start. I read the letter 3 times before deciding to respond. My reply was brief and honest. Jake, I appreciate you taking responsibility for what happened. I'm glad you're getting help. I'm not ready to have a relationship with you yet, but I hope that someday we can find a way to move forward as family. Amy and I had grown closer throughout the legal proceedings and aftermath. She had been forced to sell their house and move into a smaller rental with the children, but she seemed happier and more at peace than I had seen her in years. We met for coffee every few weeks, and she often brought Emma and Dylan, who had adapted remarkably well to their new circumstances. The kids ask about their dad sometimes, Amy told me during one of our meetings. I try to explain that he made some bad choices and needs to learn from his mistakes. Emma is old enough to understand some of it, but Dylan just knows that Daddy is away for a while. How are you doing financially? I asked, knowing it was a sensitive topic. Better than I expected, actually. Once I got control of our actual finances and eliminated all the hidden debts, I realized we could live comfortably on my income from the real estate office. Jake had me convinced that we needed his business income to survive, but that was just another lie. We're fine. Amy paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Carla, I want you to know that I've set up college funds for both kids. When they're older, I'm going to tell them about what you sacrificed trying to help their father. I want them to understand that real family loyalty looks like what you did, not what Jake did. My relationship with my parents had been more complicated to rebuild. My father had struggled with guilt about the years he had favored Jake and criticized me, while my mother dealt with shame about depleting her retirement fund and enabling Jake's behavior. We'd all attended family counseling sessions that were sometimes painful but ultimately healing. I owe you an apology that I can never fully repay, my father said during one particularly emotional session. I spent years telling you that you weren't ambitious enough, weren't successful enough, weren't responsible enough. Meanwhile, you were working yourself to exhaustion to support the son I was holding up as an example of success. My mother had been quietly crying throughout most of the session. I kept wondering why you always seemed so tired, why you never seemed to have money for vacations or nice things. I thought you were just bad with money. I never imagined that you were sending everything extra to Jake. I don't need apologies, I told them honestly. I need us to build new relationships based on who we actually are, not on the roles Jake created for us. The family dynamics had shifted dramatically. Without Jake's presence and manipulation, we were all discovering aspects of our relationships that had been hidden for years. My parents began asking about my work at the hospital, my goals for the future, my interests outside of family obligations. For the first time in my adult life, I felt seen and valued by them as an individual. The professional recognition had been unexpected but deeply satisfying. Word of my integrity during the federal investigation had spread through the hospital, and I was approached by the administration about applying for a leadership position in the emergency department. The promotion came with a significant salary increase and the opportunity to mentor new nurses, something I discovered I loved. Carla, your behavior throughout this entire situation has been exemplary. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the hospital's chief of staff, told me during my performance review, you maintained your professional standards and ethical integrity even when doing the right thing came at tremendous personal cost. That's exactly the kind of character we want in our leadership team. I had also received an unexpected scholarship to pursue a master's degree in nursing administration. The scholarship committee had learned about my situation through community news coverage of the federal case, and they wanted to support someone who had demonstrated such strong character under pressure. Perhaps most surprisingly, the community response had been overwhelmingly supportive. The local newspaper had covered the story, focusing on how an ordinary person had been caught up in criminal activities without knowing it. Instead of judgment, I received letters of support from people who had been in similar situations with family members who had addiction or financial problems. One letter came from Margaret Chen, a retired teacher whose son had stolen money from her to support a drug addiction. "Your story helped me understand that enabling our loved ones doesn't help them," she wrote. "Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to stop participating in their self-destruction." The financial recovery had been slower but steady. The government had seized Jake's business assets, but they had also recovered some of the money that had been laundered through the operation. I received a partial restitution payment of $63,000, which I used to rebuild my emergency fund and make a down payment on a small house in a quiet neighborhood near the hospital. For the first time in years, I had a financial plan that was based on my own goals rather than someone else's crisis. I was contributing the maximum amount to my retirement account. I had 6 months of expenses and savings, and I was even planning the European vacation that I had postponed to help Jake. But the most significant change was internal. The guilt and obligation that had driven so many of my decisions for years had been replaced by a clear understanding of the difference between helping and enabling, between family loyalty and family dysfunction. When Jake was released after serving 18 months of his sentence, he called to ask if we could meet. I agreed to see him at a coffee shop downtown Neutral Territory, where we could talk without the emotional weight of family history overwhelming the conversation. He looked older and thinner with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before his arrest. But there was also something different in his demeanor, a quieter, more thoughtful presence that I hadn't seen before. "I don't expect forgiveness," he began, echoing the sentiment from his letters. "I don't expect a relationship. I just wanted to thank you for testifying truthfully during the trial. My lawyer told me that your testimony actually helped establish that I had been manipulated into the criminal activity initially, even though I made the choice to continue it." "I told the truth about what I knew and when I knew it," I replied. "That was the right thing to do, regardless of how it affected your case." Jake nodded slowly. "Amy won't let me see the kids unsupervised yet. My probation officer says that's probably appropriate until I can demonstrate consistent, responsible behavior. I'm living in a halfway house and working construction for $12 an hour. It's humbling, but it's honest work." "How are you doing with the gambling addiction?" "I go to meetings 3 times a week. I've got a sponsor who's been clean for 8 years. Some days are harder than others, but I'm learning to live with uncertainty without trying to fix it with magical thinking." We talked for over an hour, and while I could see that Jake was genuinely working to change, I also recognized that rebuilding trust would be a long process, requiring consistent actions over time. "I want you to know that I'm proud of how you handled everything," Jake said as we prepared to leave. "You did the right thing even when it was hard. You protected Amy and the kids. You helped bring down criminals who were hurting other families. You're a better person than I ever gave you credit for." As I drove home from that meeting, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in less than 2 years. The sister who had worked extra shifts to send money to her brother's fake business had become a nursing supervisor who was pursuing advanced education and building a life based on her own values and goals. The family dynamics that had once revolved around protecting Jake from the consequences of his choices had been replaced by honest relationships based on mutual respect and genuine support. And perhaps most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop participating in their self-destruction, even when that decision causes temporary pain for everyone involved. 1 year after Jake's release from prison, I received an invitation that represented how far our family had come in healing from the trauma he had created. Amy was getting remarried to David Chen, a kind man she had met through her real estate work, and she wanted me to be her maid of honor. "I know it might seem strange to have a wedding after everything we've been through," Amy said when she called to ask me, "but David has been so good to me and the kids, and I want to celebrate building something healthy and honest for the first time in years." The wedding was small and elegant, held in Amy's backyard with close family and friends. Emma, now 10 years old, served as a junior bridesmaid, while 8-year-old Dylan walked Amy down the aisle with all the seriousness that such an important job deserved. My parents, who had spent the past 2 years rebuilding their relationship and their retirement fund, sat in the front row beaming with pride. Jake was not invited, and Amy had made it clear to him that while she wished him well in his recovery, he would need to earn the right to be part of their new family structure. He had accepted this boundary with grace, sending a card that simply said, "I'm happy that you found someone who deserves you." During my maid of honor speech, I talked about Amy's strength in protecting her children and rebuilding their lives after discovering the foundation they had been built on was unstable. I talked about the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who value honesty and integrity above convenience or comfort. And I talked about how the most beautiful new beginnings often emerge from the ashes of difficult endings. After the wedding, as I helped clean up the backyard while Emma and Dylan played with their new stepfather, I reflected on the journey that had brought us all to this point. 3 years ago, I had been working myself into exhaustion to fund my brother's lies while our family criticized me for not being more successful. Tonight, I was celebrating the wedding of a woman who had become one of my closest friends in a family that had learned to value truth over appearance. My career had continued to flourish in ways I never could have imagined when I was sending my paychecks to Jake every month. The master's degree I had completed the previous spring had opened doors to consulting opportunities with other hospitals looking to improve their emergency department operations. I was no longer just supporting other people's dreams. I was building my own. The house I had bought with the restitution money had become a sanctuary where I could finally relax without worrying about the next crisis phone call. I had painted the walls in colors I loved, planted a garden that brought me joy, and created spaces for reading, cooking, and entertaining friends. For the first time in my adult life, my home reflected my personality rather than just serving as a place to sleep between work shifts. My relationship with my parents had evolved into something I hadn't thought possible during the years when Jake's chaos dominated our family dynamics. We had dinner together once a week, but these meals were about genuine connection rather than obligation. They asked about my work, my goals, my interests, and they listened to my answers with the attention I had always craved but never received. "I'm proud of who you've become," my mother had told me recently. "Not just how you handled the situation with Jake, but how you used that experience to build something positive for yourself and others. You've always been stronger than any of us realized." My father, who had spent years comparing me unfavorably to Jake's supposed success, now sought my advice on financial decisions and career choices. The irony wasn't lost on me that the daughter he had once criticized for lacking ambition was now the family member with the most stable and promising future. Jake and I had developed a cautious but genuine relationship based on honesty and clear boundaries. He attended the same Gamblers Anonymous meetings as my friend Margaret's son, and they had become accountability partners for each other. Jake worked steadily in construction and had been promoted to foreman, a position that paid enough for him to contribute child support and begin making small payments toward the restitution he owed. "I'm not trying to get back what I had before," he told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings. "I'm trying to build something real this time, even if it's smaller and takes longer. The difference is that now I know the difference between success and the appearance of success." Jake had also begun attending counseling with Amy and the children, working to rebuild relationships that could accommodate his past mistakes without being defined by them. It was slow progress, but it was genuine progress based on consistent actions rather than promises. The community recognition had continued in unexpected ways. I had been invited to speak at conferences about financial fraud and family dynamics, helping other people recognize the signs of manipulation and enabling behaviors. These speaking opportunities had led to a book deal to write about my experience with proceeds going to support victims of financial fraud. "Your story resonates because it's not about being perfect," my editor explained. "It's about finding the courage to stop participating in someone else's dysfunction, even when that decision tears your family apart temporarily. A lot of people need to hear that message. But perhaps the most significant change was in my understanding of what family loyalty actually means. For years, I had confused enabling with love financial support with emotional support and keeping secrets with protecting relationships. The painful process of watching Jake face the consequences of his choices had taught me that real love sometimes requires allowing people to experience the full weight of their decisions. The scholarship fund I had established at the local nursing school was designed to support students who were working to put themselves through school while dealing with family crises that weren't their fault. Each year, I interviewed the applicants and was reminded of my younger self trying to build a career while managing the chaos that someone else had created. Education is the most reliable path to independence, I told each scholarship recipient. Whatever crisis your family is facing, your education belongs to you. Don't sacrifice your future to enable someone else's poor choices. As I sat in my garden on a quiet Sunday morning reading a book and drinking coffee without worrying about my phone ringing with the next family emergency, I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago. She had been tired, stressed, financially depleted, and emotionally exhausted from trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. The woman I had become was rested, financially secure, professionally fulfilled, and surrounded by relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The transformation hadn't been easy, and it had required me to make decisions that initially felt selfish and cold. But the result was a life that reflected my values rather than my fears. The doorbell interrupted my peaceful morning reflection. When I opened it, I found David Chen's daughter, Lisa Amy's new stepdaughter, holding a plate of homemade cookies and wearing a Girl Scout uniform. "Mrs. Patterson, would you like to buy some Girl Scout cookies?" she asked with the earnest enthusiasm of an 8-year-old entrepreneur. "Of course," I replied, inviting her in to look at my catalog. "What's your sales goal this year?" "I want to sell enough boxes to earn the trip to the state capitol. My mom says that working hard for your goals is more important than having someone give you things you didn't earn." As I watched Lisa carefully write down my order and calculate my total, I smiled at the wisdom that children absorb from the adults around them. This little girl was learning lessons about work integrity and self-sufficiency that would serve her throughout her life. After Lisa left with my payment and a promise to deliver cookies the following week, I returned to my garden and my book, grateful for the quiet life I had built from the rubble of my family's dysfunction. The phone rang around noon and I glanced at the caller ID before answering. It was Emma Amy's daughter calling to tell me about a school project she was working on about heroes in everyday life. "Aunt Carla, I want to write about you for my project," she said without preamble. "My teacher said we should pick someone who shows courage by doing the right thing even when it's hard. Will you help me understand what happened with my dad so I can explain why you're my hero?" As I talked with Emma about courage, honesty, and the difference between helping and enabling, I realized that the most important legacy of the past 3 years wasn't my professional success or my financial recovery. It was the knowledge that the children in our family were growing up with a different understanding of what healthy relationships look like. They were learning that love doesn't mean accepting lies, that family loyalty doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior, and that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the healthiest outcomes. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my quiet kitchen while planning my upcoming vacation to Italy, I thought about the question I was often asked during my speaking engagements: how do you know when to help family and when to step back? The answer I had learned was simpler than most people wanted to believe. You help when your assistance empowers someone to solve their problems. You step back when your assistance enables them to avoid the consequences of their choices. Real love requires wisdom boundaries and the courage to let people you care about experience the discomfort that leads to growth. As I settled into my favorite chair with a glass of wine and a good book, I felt a deep sense of peace that had nothing to do with my circumstances and everything to do with my choices. I had learned to build a life based on my values rather than other people's expectations, and the result was a happiness that felt solid and sustainable. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to live, according to the principles I had learned through pain and struggle. But tonight I was simply grateful for the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've found the courage to stop participating in other people's chaos and start building your own peace. Have you ever found yourself supporting someone whose success was really built on your sacrifice? How did you find the courage to step back and protect your own future? I'd love to hear your stories about setting boundaries with family members who were taking advantage of your love. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through difficult family situations. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stop enabling someone else's destructive choices, even when that someone is family. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop participating in someone else's self-destruction. Your future self will thank you for having the courage to choose your own well-being over temporary peace.